On the morning of April 7, 2026, 15 countries sat around a table at the United Nations in New York City. On the table was a simple question. Should the world act to reopen the Strait of Hormuz? 11 countries said yes, 2 said no, and those 2 countries, China and Russia, said no with such force that the question died on the spot. The room went silent. The U.S. Ambassador Mike Waltz looked directly at the cameras and said, "No one should tolerate that. They are holding the global economy at gunpoint." But today, Russia and China did tolerate it. Here's what makes that moment bizarre. China and Russia are supposed to be Iran's closest allies. They've signed strategic partnership agreements with Tehran. They've sold them weapons. They've bought their oil for years, quietly defying Western sanctions to keep Iran economically alive. And yet, as American and Israeli bombs continue to fall on Iranian cities, as the Strait of Hormuz, the most important waterway in the world, sits effectively closed. China and Russia are standing at the back of the room, arms crossed, doing absolutely nothing to stop it. They vetoed a UN resolution, but they haven't sent a single warship. They haven't issued a military ultimatum. They haven't even threatened to cut off trade with the United States. They are watching Iran burn. And the question you have to ask yourself is, why? The surface answer is the one Russia and China gave inside the Security Council chamber. Russia's ambassador, Vasily Nebenzia, said the resolution was one-sided. It blamed Iran for the crisis, without mentioning that the United States and Israel started the war in the first place by launching strikes on Iranian soil on February 28 and 2026. China's ambassador, Fu Kong, said the draft failed to capture the root causes and the full picture of the conflict. They weren't wrong, technically. The resolution did demand that Iran stop its attacks without demanding the same of the United States. And so their veto looked, on the surface, like a principled act of solidarity, like 2 powerful friends standing up for a smaller friend being bullied in the playground. But wait, if China and Russia are truly standing with Iran, why is Iran burning? This is where the story gets complicated. Let's go back to what actually happened on February 28th. The United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes on Iran. The world held its breath. Within hours, Iran's government responded by doing what it had threatened to do for years. It blocked the Strait of Hormuz. Now, if you don't know what the Strait of Hormuz is, picture a narrow corridor of water, only 33 kilometers wide, at its tightest point, sitting between Iran on one side and Oman on the other. Every single day, roughly 20% of the world's oil passes through that corridor. About 1/5 of the global oil supply moves through a patch of sea you could drive across in less than half an hour. Iran put mines in that water, positioned coastal missile batteries along the shore, deployed drone swarms overhead, and effectively said to the world, "Nothing moves unless we say so." The economic shock was immediate. Oil prices started climbing. Freight costs exploded. Countries in Asia started rationing fuel. Gulf nations that export oil, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Qatar suddenly couldn't ship their product out. Their airports were being hit by Iranian drones. Saudi Aramco's largest refinery at Ras Tanura was struck and halted production. The Gulf, which is essentially the planet's oil pump, was hemorrhaging. And through all of this, China and Russia watched. They condemned the US strikes verbally. They called for a ceasefire. They proposed their own, softer counter-resolution at the UN. But they sent no ships. They pulled no triggers. Here's your first anomaly, the one that should make you stop and think. A limited number of vessels, specifically those linked to China, Russia, India, and a handful of other countries Iran considers friendly, were allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz, even while it was officially blockaded. Not American ships, not European tankers, but Chinese and Russian-linked ships. Those got a pass, so Iran is shutting down global shipping for the world. But quietly, Selectively, it kept a VIP lane open for Beijing and Moscow. That tells you something important about the actual relationship here. To understand why China and Russia are playing this game the way they are, you have to understand how the three countries got tangled together in the first place. And that story starts not in 2026, but decades earlier. Iran has been under Western sanctions since 1979, ever since the Islamic Revolution that overthrew the US-backed Shah and took American diplomats hostage. For nearly 50 years, Iran has been economically strangled by the West. It couldn't sell its oil freely on the international market. It couldn't use Western banks. It couldn't access the global financial system the way other countries could. Into that vacuum stepped China. Quietly, patiently, without fanfare, China needed oil. Iran had oil and desperately needed a buyer who wouldn't be scared off by American sanctions. It was a perfect match. By 2025, China was buying roughly 90% of all the oil Iran exported. Not 50%, not 70%, 90%. About 1.4 million barrels every single day flowing from Iran to China, mostly through shadow fleet tankers, old ships with their tracking signals switched off, traveling under foreign flags, relabeling Iranian oil as Malaysian or Emirati oil when it arrived at Chinese ports, before being processed by small independent refineries that the big Chinese state-owned companies had deliberately kept at arm's length. It was an elaborate industrial-scale operation to get around Western sanctions, and it had been running for years. In 2021, Iran and China formalized this relationship by signing a 25-year cooperation agreement. The deal was worth an estimated $400 billion. China would buy Iranian oil at below-market prices. In exchange, China would invest in Iranian infrastructure, ports, railways, telecommunications, and offer security cooperation. It was a lifeline dressed up as a partnership. Russia's relationship with Iran followed a similar trajectory. After Western sanctions hit Russia hard following its invasion of Ukraine in 2022, Moscow needed friends who wouldn't flinch at American pressure. Iran, which had been living under sanctions for decades, had already figured out how to survive. The two countries shared weapons technology, military tactics, and a deep mutual understanding of what it feels like to be the target of Western economic warfare. By 2025, Russia and Iran had signed their own comprehensive strategic partnership. So you have three countries, China, Russia, Iran, all bound by agreements, all aligned against Western pressure, all with reasons to support each other. And yet, when the bombs started falling on Iran, the cavalry didn't come. Now here's the part of the story that most people miss, the part that changes everything. China's 25-year deal with Iran was built on the assumption that Iran would be a stable, long-term supplier of cheap oil. But right now, Iran isn't stable. It's at war. And while Iran was absorbing US and Israeli strikes, something very quiet was happening on the other side of the world. Russia was loading extra oil onto tankers headed for China. In January and February 2026, right before the war began, China surged its oil imports by 16%. Russia pumped an extra 300,000 barrels per day toward Chinese ports. China spent those months stockpiling. By early 2026, China had assembled a strategic petroleum reserve of roughly 1.2 to 1.4 billion barrels of oil. That's about 4 months of imports, sitting in tanks, waiting. China wasn't caught off guard by this war. China was ready for it. And here is the hidden player that changes the entire dynamic. Russia. The Peterson Institute for International Economics ran the numbers. And in a scenario where this war lasts just 3 months, Russia could earn an additional $161 billion in oil export revenues, roughly $500 million every single day, with an extra $97 billion in budget revenues, more than Russia's entire 2025 fiscal deficit. PIIE. Let that settle in for a moment. Russia has a strategic partnership with Iran. Russia claims to be Iran's friend, but Iran being at war, the Strait of Hormuz being closed, oil prices spiking, the world scrambling for supply, is one of the best things that has ever happened to the Russian government's finances. Every day the strait stays closed, Russia's oil gets more valuable. Every barrel Iran can't sell, Russia can replace at a higher price. Russia is Iran's friend in the boardroom and Iran's passive beneficiary on the battlefield. China's position is more complex, but equally calculated. It was Russia that had by 2025 become the undisputed leader in Chinese oil imports, accounting for 17.5%. Moscow is emerging as one of the main beneficiaries of Trump's Iranian intervention. It could well redirect some of its oil exports from India to China, simultaneously easing American pressure on New Delhi and supporting Beijing. Trump's interventions give Moscow an opportunity to reaffirm the key argument behind Russian-Chinese rapprochement, that maritime routes for supplying resources to China could be cut off at any moment by the United States, so the only reliable option is pipelines and roads from Russia. Carnegie Endowment for International Peace. That last point is crucial. China has a deep structural vulnerability that keeps its military planners awake at night. China imports roughly 70% of its oil from foreign suppliers, and most of it arrives by sea routes that could, in a crisis, be blocked by the United States Navy. The US has the most powerful naval force in history, with carrier groups stationed across the Pacific and the Indian Ocean. If Washington ever chose to blockade China's oil supply over Taiwan, for instance, Beijing could find itself economically strangled within months. Russia has been whispering to China for years, "Stop depending on sea routes you don't control. Use our pipelines instead." The Power of Siberia pipeline already runs from Russia to China. A second pipeline, Power of Siberia 2, has been in negotiation for years and was finally agreed at the political level in September 2025. The Iran crisis is, in a strange way, Russia's best sales pitch for why China should accelerate that pipeline and reduce its dependence on the Persian Gulf. And there's something else. China is getting out of this conflict that has nothing to do with oil prices. Observing US naval operations in the Gulf in real time, carrier movements, missile intercept patterns, logistics flows, is itself strategically valuable for China as it thinks through scenarios involving the Strait of Taiwan. The more the US deploys and reveals its operational playbook and weaknesses in the Gulf, the better calibrated Beijing's own planning becomes. PIIE. China is essentially sitting in the front row of a live military exercise, watching how the United States actually fights. Every carrier group deployment, every missile defense intercept, every logistics decision, every vulnerability exposed. China is taking notes, because the next major confrontation it expects to face is not in the Persian Gulf, it's in the Taiwan Strait. Now let's look at what this conflict is doing to everyone else on the planet. 1/5 of the world's oil normally flows through the Strait of Hormuz. When that flow stops, the ripple goes everywhere. Not just to countries that import Middle Eastern oil, but to every economy that runs on the global system those oil flows support. Fuel prices in Asia spiked almost immediately. Countries introduced consumption restrictions and rationing. The World Food Programme warned that food supply chains were under pressure because agriculture and transport are both deeply oil-dependent. European manufacturers, already squeezed by years of energy instability, started absorbing another cost shock. And the Gulf nations, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, the UAE, Bahrain, Qatar, these countries were not just losing shipping routes, they were being hit directly. In response to US and Israeli attacks beginning on February 28, Iran targeted hotels, airports, residential buildings, and other civilian infrastructure in more than 10 countries, including Gulf neighbors who are some of the world's major exporters of oil and natural gas, PBS. The Gulf states, who depend entirely on those oil exports for their national budgets, were watching Iranian drones drop on their infrastructure, while the UN failed to act. That failure at the UN, the veto on April 7th, was not a surprise to anyone who understood the math. The original version of the resolution called for member states to use all necessary means to unblock the strait and invoked the UN Charter's Chapter 7, which authorizes the Council to approve actions including sanctions and the use of force. AL Monitor, Russia and China killed that version immediately. Then the resolution was watered down to allow only defensive measures, still vetoed. Then it was watered down again. No reference to Security Council authorization, no language about adjacent waters. 11 countries still voted yes. Russia and China still said no. Daniel Forty, head of UN affairs at the International Crisis Group, said China and Russia saw the resolution as too escalatory and not capturing the need for impartial and consistent diplomacy, arguing that the text placed all of the blame on Iran. AL Monitor, they promised to submit a counterproposal calling for a cessation of hostilities, meaning they want to protect Iran's narrative while the war continues to benefit Russia economically and give China time to watch and learn. The final scene of April 7th is almost theatrical in its absurdity. Trump had set an 8 p.m. deadline. Reopen the strait or face strikes on power plants and bridges. He posted on Truth Social that morning, "A whole civilization will die tonight." It was the most extreme language used by an American president in modern memory. Hours later, less than 2 hours before his own deadline, Trump stepped back. He offered Iran a 2-week ceasefire in exchange for temporarily reopening the strait. Iran accepted. Passage through the strait during those 2 weeks would be allowed under Iranian military management. Iranian officials, speaking anonymously, expressed frustration with Moscow's perceived inaction. They said Tehran felt let down by both Russia and China, despite repeated calls for support. CNA, that frustration is real, and it reveals the truth beneath the alliance. China and Russia are not Iran's guardians. They are Iran's customers and strategic calculators. They will shield Iran at the UN podium, because the optics of appearing to stand with a smaller country against American aggression are politically valuable. But they will not spill their own blood or risk their own economic relations with the West for Tehran's sake. Their partnership agreements have no mutual defense clauses. There is no Article 5. No, an attack on one is an attack on all. It is, as one analyst put it, a relationship of aligned interests, not shared destinies. Russia is making money. China is building reserves and studying American military tactics. Both are watching Iran fight a war that conveniently weakens a Western-aligned Gulf, drives up their strategic leverage, and accelerates the argument that the world needs an alternative to the US-dominated financial and military order. Iran is the fire. China and Russia are sitting beside it, warming their hands. Here's what I want you to sit with. The Strait of Hormuz has been described as the world's most important oil choke point for decades. Every major power on Earth knows that whoever controls or threatens that waterway controls a lever that can bring the global oil economy to its knees. Iran found that lever. The United States attacked Iran partly to remove that threat, and in the chaos that followed, two countries that didn't fire a single shot, China and Russia, managed to come out stronger, higher oil revenues, fuller strategic reserves, a clearer picture of how America actually fights, and a UN narrative where they look like the responsible adults calling for peace. The question worth asking quietly, carefully, is not whether China and Russia are Iran's allies, that's almost beside the point now. The real question is whether Iran ever fully understood what kind of allies it actually had, because there's a difference between a friend who fights beside you and a friend who profits from your fight, and the difference only becomes clear when the bombs are already falling.